Welcome everybody, and welcome Melanie. First of all, thank you for accepting this invitation. My name is Valerio del Baglivo. I'm a visiting curator of UNIDEE, the residency and workshop program of Città dell'Arte. We are now about to broadcast a talk of Melanie Bouteloup, director of Betonsalon and Villa Vasiliev, which is the third of a series of presentations of museum directors. We had the pleasure to talk with Charles Esche and Francis McKee, and please follow us today and tomorrow with Director of Tensta Kunsthalle Cecilia Widenheim. The program is titled Modes of Instituting, and it marks the 20th anniversary of UNIDEE. And beside the presentation of museum curator, we also organizes a series of workshops with artists who invented their own organization. In the past weeks, we spent days discussing with artists Kobe Mattis and Stefan Nowotny, with artist Annette Kraus and Deputy Casco Director Jolande van der Eyde, with artists Jana Graham and Valeria Graziano, and we are currently finishing our workshop experience with Vic van der Poel. I wanted to also thank to the participants that attended the program. Their names are Aguila Budalayev, Gaia Di Lorenzo, Nicolas Ferrara, Giulia Floris, Carlotta Sofia Grassi, Maj Nasrallah, Yates Norton, and Carolina Ongaro. Melanie, before we start, I wanted to read your biography, and then I leave you the space to introduce your practice to the audience. Melanie is the director of Betonsalon, Center for Art and Research, and Villa Vasiliev in Paris. Over the past 15 years, she has directed a number of projects that aim to root art in society in partnership with many local, national, and international organizations. In 2012, alongside artistic director Oki Enzovo, Melanie was associate curator of La Triennale, an event initiated by the Ministry of Culture and Communication and organized by the Centre National des Arts Plastiques and the Palais de Tokyo. In 2014, Melanie was named Knight of the Order of Arts and Letters by the French government. And in 2016, with Pernod Ricard, she inaugurated the Villa Vasiliev, which I hope we could discuss today with you. So I leave you the stage to introduce you. Thanks again.
Okay, thanks a lot. So thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this program. I prepared a few notes to actually discuss the role of art organizations in times of crisis. And I would like today to kind of present the work that is being done at Villa Vasiliev, which opened a few years ago, and share some thoughts about the instituting of Betonsalon from the very beginning, and current challenges that we are facing today. So maybe to start, I will talk a little bit about the context in which Betonsalon and Villa Vasiliev is operating. So France. We are actually experiencing, like in many other countries, a kind of identity crisis. And the recent deadly attacks that happened in France actually were like executed by some extremist young people who found in these terrible acts the only way somehow for them to exist. And why that? I think it is like a very long story, but I think that institutions in France and of course elsewhere are totally failing to recognize that they are actually made of migrations, and many young people don't recognize themselves in what they are doing, in what they are showing. And I think this is a very, very problematic situation because either you are at school or in the university, and the French narrative that is being told, is very Eurocentered, and they are unable to take into account that French history is made of multiple trajectories and encounters, and identities are plural and not fixed. And this is a discourse that is totally difficult to get on public media, but also in museums or in education. And Betonsalon is based on one part, in a university, so we really see it around us, that it's a difficult question to deal with. There is one fact that actually tells a lot. There are only 4 teachers in French universities. I have this number for a year or 2 ago that are actually teaching Maghreb, contemporary history in art history as well, and in historic department. And so it can only be an option, given by one teacher somewhere. And for me, this is I don't understand, because I think as long as young people who compose, like the youth, and the population of France, and they are French, will not be able to actually learn at school or talk at school, about there are multiple history coming with parents, maybe coming from Maghreb, or even grandfathers, and the problem is that these people are not considered French. They are in a kind of limbo zone, we don't know how to deal with them. And they are denied somehow a real place in society. And suburbs are being opposed to Parisians, and this is becoming stronger and stronger. And we observe polarizations that are becoming more and more tense, and with a total impossibility of dialogue. And somehow I feel that this situation should be a starting point for what we are trying to do in arts organization. So I have been reading Fatima El Tayeb, who actually talks about this problem in relation with Europe, and she actually says and states that this omission from official narrative should actually be taken as a possibility to organize subversion. So I prefer to see this situation as an opportunity to actually work and try to change things. And in a way, then the question would be, how do we do that, and with which tools? Should we learn to use the tools of the institutions so that we can play with them, or should we invent some other strategies to actually challenge them? And I think these 2 questions are necessary to develop a program and a methodology. And somehow I've been looking at poetry. Someone like Gloria Ansaldúa. She's a Mexican American poet, I'm sure you know. And there is one essay that in our program at one point we showed a manuscript, and which actually somehow illustrate this concept that she invented, called autohistoria teoria. And for her, it's a poetic form, that she can create, which is actually a mix or an assemblage of different words, languages, registers of language, And all this is mixed in a totally non-linear way, very singular, very personal, and somehow by having this mix, it's a way for her to overcome like simple oppositions, you know. And for me, what is interesting in her practice is that it's both a way to self-express yourself as a plural person, and it's also a way to transcend like bipolarities and not be, you know, in assimilation or in opposition, but somewhere else, which would be playing with the borders, you know, and the categories, like having them appear at one point and then in the same sentence, you know, they are deconstructed. And I really like this way actually of working with the opposites. And in a way, this is what we are trying to do at Betonsalon and at Villa Vassiliev. And it's not easy task, of course, because then you play with conflict. You accept that what you're doing is conflictual. And you, of course, when it is about conflict, you need to react constantly and adapt and invent tools or play with existing tools. Well, I mean, all this. And but I think that it is only by being into these movements that you can really like produce knowledge. And with Betonsalon and Villa Vassiliev, I'm interested to see how we can actually produce like another kind of knowledge, that the very academic one, you know, which is the one of the university around us, or the canon of the art history knowledge, you know, very Eurocentrist. And so how can we work within these frames, very classic, institutional, and move, shake them, you know, or sleep on them, or I don't know, like create moments of disruption so that we can open some thoughts, or I don't know. And actually, we don't really know, you know, where we go when we work like that, because of course, when you meet someone, for instance, who at the beginning doesn't want to work with you, of course you don't understand each other first, and then maybe you can talk, and maybe there is a tension, and sometimes they overcome, sometimes not, and it can fail, and we have to accept it, that it's like this, because for me it's the meaning of what we do, actually, to feel that you are pushing borders, and it's hard, so it means that you are doing something, I think, that is a bit maybe having a small impact, yeah, because I think this is what we are trying to do. And somehow I think that this is by working this way, like involving different people who don't agree with each other, that maybe we can write something, you know, which would be more common, and it's also maybe a way, you know, not just to show ourselves talking about issues like post-colonial, or I don't know, like difficult issues, you know. I think it's not enough to just be talking about it. I think it's interesting when you can actually also like interact and yeah, be in a very I don't know how to say, like reality, you know, on the ground praxis. So we are trying to go outside of the art walls, and this is very hard as well, because of course an art institution is not legitimate somehow for many people who feel excluded from institutions or even from the arts, you know, and so you have to really talk a lot to trust each other, and then once there is a bit of trust, then you can start to see how you can work, and you have to spend time on the ground and go outside, you know, and all this takes a lot of time. And I think it's also very important to mention that it's long-term investment, yeah, is essential. yeah, totally. I mean, you can make many trials. I mean, one little thing then will lead to another little thing, and then one little thing, and then one bit bigger thing, and I think there is no other way. Actually, it's been like 17 years now that we are trying to develop this kind of situated practice. Dealing with people who we feel are more like citizens, or people who are when we started like 17 years ago, it was like the 20 years after the creation of art centers in France. Most of them were really like built, and financed in the 80s. And it was a moment like when actually public entities, were reflecting on what they've been doing and supporting, and we could take this opportunity to actually arrive in the conversation and say, okay, we think this format, Art Center, is a great format because it gives perennity somehow, it's an institution, so it allows for a sustainable presence because there is good funding, and we believe that these institutions should be born from individual initiatives rather than from the top down, So that's when we came to the state, the city, the region. We told them, okay, we are a group of artists and curators, and we would like you to support the institution we want to create. And of course, we are aware that there is no more money today, but we are ready to accept a little bit first and then to work and see if we can get more over time. And we've been so instituting and trying many strategies. And today it's also after 15 years, a crucial moment, because now I think we are seen as an institution, but we are not really. But this I will talk about it a bit later. But over the years, we have been able to actually develop like strong programs that we are proud of. And I will try to talk about one, so you have an example. We've been developing a partnership, very informal, with Centre Pompidou. They have like a collection of photographs made by a photographer called Marc Vaux. So maybe I will show you now some picture because it will be better. Okay, so you can see my screen now.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so maybe first here, this is Betonsalon.
Yes.
In the university. Here, this is Villa Vassiliev, and the studio we have there for artists to come in residency. This is the text by Gloria Anceldua, that you know. And this is Marc Vaux. So this guy actually photographed artist works in their studios all his life, from the 20s to the 80s. And in total, it's about 200,000 photographs that are on glass plates and were stored at Pompidou, because when he died, someone there could buy these photographs. But for many years, they were not used or just stored because very fragile, and they are all stored in boxes like these ones. Here they are in the basement of Marc Vaux, and this is how it was stored at Pompidou. So very little, a small room, and like in a storage, outside Paris, so difficult to access and no team to deal with it directly. So of course, when researchers were asking maybe to consult, some boxes, it was impossible for Pompidou to really manage, some access. So the only thing they could do is make an Excel list of all the boxes and divide the collection in 3 parts. So the first part is called part A, and it's made of very famous artists, Picasso, Matisse, etc. And this part was a bit used for catalogs, artworks reproductions. So it was more conceived as a documentation resource rather than anything. And then there is a group B and group C, which is actually artists who are totally unknown. And most of them are artists coming from abroad, many women, many artists from India, Poland, Russia, I mean, everywhere. And in a way, this archive is a kind of inventory of who passed by Paris over the 20th century, who stayed, even for 1 year, because Margot was very prolific. He was really walking and going to meet many artists, and everybody kind of knew him. So if they wanted their work to be documented, they needed to call him, and it was a work for him. So he was paid, but we have very little information, no archive of invoices, so it's very difficult to retrace, the mapping of who was when in Paris. But if we work on it more deeply, I mean, we can make interesting discoveries of trajectories. And so this is a bit the work we started to do with Pompidou. So here there is one glass plate of an artist called Esther Karp, who is a Jewish artist. And we don't really know why, but she asked Margot to use one glass plate for several artworks. If she had no money and she needed, I don't know, to fill the space, and we can only speculate, of course, but when you cross information from different sources, then you can get some interesting information. And so there are a few photographs like these ones where you can see how the documents traveled from one exhibition in an institution to another one, and the very few information we have on them, it's like nothing. So here another glass plate by Esther Karp. And this is Wilfred Olam in his studio. So sometimes you also see artists, and it's very interesting to see how they were showing their work in a picture, but non-modern style somehow, no white wall with the work shown on the face. It's more the work living around the artist as it is being produced somehow. And we are interested in this type of images because they document another way to actually show art, and in institutions mostly the dominant way is really white cube, modern way, in which the work is isolated, from the context. And here you can see the sources of information and what Wilfred Olam was looking at. And so it's very great source of information actually. And so we did this small research trip in the storage with a few curators, artists, and researchers that we could have access. We were allowed. And we spent a bit of time there, and by actually opening some boxes, we could find interesting things that later on were used by curators of the institution to develop exhibition surveys, on India, for instance. So one part could be made thanks to this work. So it's to talk about the results of this type of work. It's very little thing, on the margins, of the blockbuster shows, let's say, no real budget. but at least it is something. And of course, maybe it could get bigger. And I want to see this as a positive fact, actually. So, well, this is a symposium with an organized. And this is an interesting picture of Antariksa, who is running like a Kunci art center in Indonesia. And he came to do a research on Fujita's friends. And he's not the conventional, let's say, academic researcher. And I found his methodology quite funny. And he just put that picture on Facebook with numbers of who he knew and some question marks for some people. And after a while, with his own network of people, he could actually name all of them. And so I think it's also interesting to combine different strategies, because there is always this opposition between academic, artistic, amateur, and I think all of these tools are interesting, and I think should be in interaction to conceive like a research or a project. And the artists we are interested in are artists who's been traveling from one country to another and who we think lack some recognition. So here you can find Pan Yuliang, a Chinese artist who is actually really well known in China, or maybe you've heard of her. There are a lot of books that depicts of life as maybe a prostitute, then becoming a famous artist in Paris, etc. But there is nothing serious on her, actually, like really academic, well, few little things. So she died like lonely in Paris. She arrived at the beginning of the 20th century. She died in 1977. And she had no recognition, we could say. And even today, in China, she's not recognized as someone important because she was abroad and painting nudes and influenced, by Europe. And in France, she was considered the Asian woman artist, so really not the official canon. So she could only get like a small show before she died. And I think her work is totally underestimated. And we tried to work with some curators in the Guangdong Times Museum to actually do some research on her. So we found some archives, and Marc Vaux photographed her, of course. And this is her, in her apartment. And some paintings, she was making. And I think that she was actually very conscious of her position of exile and exotized woman, in France, and that her paintings were actually a kind of critique of this, exacerbating maybe a little bit, the Chinese aspect with the calligraphy, all this kind of exotic mask, and it's a bit like the hair very dark, etc. There are many, tricks to identify as Chinese, but then you have these nudes, and you have the influence of Matisse, and it's really in between. And I think she was really actively negotiating with this different discourse of being seen as someone from outside, so never from within. So a bit like Gloria Anzaldúa somehow, but with painting. And we tried to organize a show where we would show this. That actually she was very conscious, and her work was a strong critique of this situation. I should just show you some pictures of the process as well, and how her works are being stored in a small museum in China. Very accessible, because as soon as you start to look at these works, you realize it's easy to access. You just can touch them and you can work on it, and and then you can make some works from. So this is a work by Miayu, who really work a lot on this. So yeah, from that I wanted to talk about the specificity of Villa, which is like to accompany artists and researchers in their project on let's say middle term. So everyone can come for at least 3 months, and we try to adapt to their ideas and not ask them to produce anything. So if they are lost.
Melanie, can I ask you to switch back if you are not gonna show images anymore? If you can switch back, and then yes, of course, maybe start by describing how the residency in Villa Vasiliev work. How do you select artists, and how many do you host?
So can you see me now? Yeah.
Very good. Yeah, very good.
Perfect. So yes, we have this program called Pernod Ricard Fellowship, in which we invite 4 artists or curators a year, every 3 months, and they receive like about 20,000 euros each for fees, production, transportation, and what did I forget? Well, a free studio. So it's really good conditions. It's totally luxurious, and we could have this for 5 years with this sponsor. We were very lucky. And so we could really do. We had no counterparts to provide to this sponsor because it's a big group, and they did not really care somehow, and so they were happy. They were trusting us, and for them it was a way to support the arts. And we did a lot then with artists with who we initiated many conversations that are still going on today. We tried to help them sometime to take a break, because there is also a need for that. So many emails, projects, production, and it's good to arrive in a place where people tell you, okay, you can just take your time. And at this moment we have an artist, Ingela Irman from Sweden, who really is happy to have time to read and just talk and do some research. So we are interested in this moment where you are redefining also your practice, and in a way, it's good to be in contact with new ideas, new people, and we try to connect our residents with local art scene, and more specifically with young artists from art schools, so they can do workshops together. So workshops like maybe to learn how to do ceramic, or I don't know, like very technical things. So at least, you can discover new techniques, but it can also be workshops on contents or visits in archives. I mean, it's really like depending on who is in residency. And for us, it's also a way to defend this idea of an enlarged notion of art, because art is not just, producing artworks, but it's about, conversations, discussions, encounters, new modalities, to support the art is also a way to actually have the works like not formatted into an exhibition driven format. And so it's more like a forum, we could say, where people can meet, like either because we organize it or just by coincidence, and we like this. So for us to kind of maintain this, we will have to develop collaborations with many both individuals with who we need to maintain conversations over time, so they are happy to come back, and also with institutions, so we can keep the trust between us, and also allow for working a bit further, and just not just meeting, but trying to see if we can also influence the programs of Quai Branly or museums like this. So no, I mean, this is a moment that actually becomes a bit more like critical. So I wanted to talk about, like, very quickly the way we try to institute, you know, with all this, because it's a lot and the story is a long one. First we were volunteers, then we started to get a bit of funding and we got a lot for artists, but we had to secure the space because it's very hard to keep a space permanent. And then once we have a kind of permanent situation, we wanted to secure the team salaries and the working conditions. So it's really, we could only do this a bit step by step. And we tried also to develop our funding by developing cultural engineering or trying like some private sponsorship and in France, you know, private and public don't really mix yet. It's a bit new, and we were maybe the first art center to accept to receive money from the private, because most of them they receive 90% public, and our economy is 30% public and 70% private and partnerships and co-productions and etc. So of course the results were interesting because we could get money for artists, we could get 7 employees, and we are paid normal, like even a bit better than in art organizations, you know, from the public sector in France. But it's very low, but yeah, so yeah, we come from zero, so yeah. And we tried also to develop like strategies to work in a more like sustainable way, because all this is very exhausting. And so the problems we have is that every year you need to adapt to a new situation. Either you lose a big sponsor, so you need to find like a new one, you know. The year after, people are leaving, because of course when you are a young professional in the art sector and you learn a lot in one place, then you want to also move to another place. And we also encourage this because our institution is rather small compared to others in France. And then how do you professionalize when you are actually constructing your own stability? You have to find money. And so it's always a bit of a difficult task to find moment for administration, for corresponding to the classic format of art center, you know, because there are many regulations in France that you need to respect. And of course, at one point you respect all of them, but then you have no more time, you know, for experimentation. And how do you actually, so there are many pitfalls also that we try to avoid when you deal with projects about post-colonial feminist theory, and because you deal with people who are very engaged and they look at you like you are the institution. I don't want to work with you. You are not legitimate. My struggle has meaning where it is now and not in your place. So you have to really talk a lot so that it can be interesting for them. And at one point, when there is something wrong, I don't know, like a project that fail a little bit, well, then it creates expectations, and it's never enough. And how do you deal, you know, with these expectations? Because you could also be enclosed in a kind of new dogma, which would be the post-colonial feminist art center in France. And at one point, first, we were criticized for dealing with these issues because then art, you know, needs to be autonomous. Then the second step was you are not showing enough Black people, for instance. So this is a bit bullshit what you are trying to do. Then you are not talking about the yellow vest, okay? But so, well, there are many of these problems that I think it's very difficult to deal with all expectations, and because also at the end we were not really an institution because not stable funding, and we were not really an alternative art organization because we were trying to be in this model of an institution. So you are in no place like Pan Young or Gloria Anzaldúa somehow. and you need to face like very practical problems on a day-to-day basis. And I believe that long term and accepting to fail and discomfort is a good strategy, but sometimes people with you don't think so, because they think we need to be more radical and that we need also to make maybe tabula rasa of everything, because this is the only way to make a big change. And so it's difficult to have these different, desires and strategies in one structure. Yeah. But it's like, a bit like the left party in France. I don't know. I mean, there are many groups, and
Also in Italy.
Yeah, they don't agree to each other because they have different theories, and it's never enough. Blah, blah, blah. And at the end, there is no party, and somehow it could happen. That it's hard to federate if there are so many ideas and you want to do things differently. And I think today there are new challenges coming. We are in a kind of new epoch somehow. There are more curators than 15 years ago, more competition, more pressure to get a CV, to do something, and more need at urgency somehow, because the situation is getting worse. So you want to engage, you want to do things. So you want results quick. And so you don't accept that things, might take a bit of time, because there is no time, if you deal with environmental issues, for instance, it's hard to say, okay, we will work long term. And then there is also a lot of anxiety because there are so many things that are not working. And so how do you feel the positive aspect of what you do, and how do you keep the pleasure, which is so important if you are into this? I think that we actually need to, if I would imagine institutions like in 20 years, because this was a bit like the question, I'm not really optimistic, I have to say. I think they might not exist anymore, and that there will be a lot of militant movements, who will kind of organize like tabula rasa, etc. But I'm really wondering, okay, but then who will be able to stay, out of this and get the funding for that, And I was having this conversation with Beirut Art Residency recently. Someone came to Paris, and it was really in the middle of the protest, and she was telling me, yeah, we are almost in a point that there will be nothing. But then, yes, when there will be nothing, how it's a big question mark, what happens? And so I would say that maybe one solution, if I would need to be optimistic, would be to see how we can actually reclaim our institutions and defend the positivity, of what we have built, because we need to valorize all the positive things we are doing. And I know it's hard today to valorize, because it's always seems a bit nothing compared to what is needed. But if we really know how to valorize it, then maybe we can get closer with others, and maybe new networks of solidarity could emerge that accept that internally they don't agree. But we need to accept that it's a struggle, and we might make mistakes, we might not doing it right, but we are trying, and I think we share the same vision. So how can we stand, together? And this is a bit what they are trying, like now in Beirut, this is my hope that we will be able to do that. So I'm down with this.
Well, thank you very much. It was we kept the pleasure to hear you, so it was very interesting, and it was also interesting to hear the difficulties and problematics that are beyond the everyday running of a space, the conflicts with the people that are inside, and the difficulties in understanding or thinking about future. I'm glad that you raised this idea of possible scenario in 20 years, because, of course, this was maybe one of the discussion we had here. The participants at the workshop, they come from different contexts, and they are experiencing different problematics. There is at least one Carolina who is now considering possibility to finish, and so one of the biggest question was what to do with what you have done. I wanted to open up the questions, if you don't mind. Do you guys have questions?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello. My name is Gaia. Firstly, thank you, because you stay positive and you transmit positivity, even though there are 1,000 problematics. I just opened a space a year ago in Rome, which is very similar to yours. And it's very interesting to hear about your experience, and obviously you have a lot more than I do. What interests me might sound a bit banal, but it comes from the running, the technical side of things. I was wondering, because we have the similar system of having more private funding than public, but we find ourselves in a weird impasse where if we're not recognized by the Ministry of Culture, then we cannot ask for artist visa for people that are from outside Europe, for example, or it's a lot more difficult to get public funding. There are a lot of problems with the fact of not being recognized. At the same time, it's a value to not be recognized because you are, in a way, more independent, and you don't have to respond to anyone. And there's that, we were talking today about the positive aspect of being precarious, of being off balance, could end at any moment. Therefore, it's also a kind of energy to do more. So I was wondering, how do you, maybe if you could tell me a bit more of how it happened, because I know that you are recognized and you do have a relationship, how it works, how it happened, what's your experience in that? Thank you.
Of course, this is a big question, that we've been having, like, for instance, with Castillo Corrales, who was like a curator, artist run space. And they decided not to depend from the ministry or public bodies because they were saying that they don't want to lose their time in filling forms and giving accounts, etc., and maybe losing their independency, etc. And my point on this is that one thing which is very important, we have always been able to do what we want with total independency, even if we got this funding from the Ministry of Culture. And the reason for that is because we are not receiving a lot. So they are not, asking us to do what they would, because we are not state-driven. We are a non-profit organization who receive some funding from a lot of various public bodies and private. So everybody is giving a little. So at the end, you keep your independency like this, in terms of you can do what you want. But of course, then you have another dependency, is a dependency of money, and you need to maintain relations with all these people, and it takes time. But if you have not of this, the model, for instance, of Castillo Corrales was that they were all teachers in schools, so they had jobs, so they could take some time, but some free time with volunteers and many people not paid. And over the years, of course, it's difficult. And for us, this was very important from the very beginning, because some of us already tried to run spaces for 2-3 years, like for free. And the statement was, when we met, we don't want this anymore. We've done it. Now we want something permanent with money so that we can be paid for the work we do. And we had to invent a strategy for that. And our strategy was a bit like, when I'm thinking about it today, I'm like, okay, this was really another time. But it was, okay, we do a lot so that we impress them, because then they think we work hard and we have so many artists to show, So we were doing shows every 2 weeks. So they were so kind of impressed that they say, okay, we give you something. and of course after a while we stopped doing so much. But today I think it's different context, because when you start a project, one important thing is the working conditions. So if you don't have money, you don't want to invest too much. But then, I mean, how do you do? I mean, maybe one I would say that today maybe one way would be to start having private money. So find a sponsor, a private foundation who can support your initial, initiative, and then you can attract public maybe afterwards. But at that time, we really wanted to have first the basis secured, funding and place by the state, the city, the region, like an official art center, because we believed that there was still this possibility, and maybe it was the last moment it was possible, and then we wanted to find a new economy. But and I think when I look at it now, I mean, I think it's so. I mean, it has been a lot of work, but to be able to have the stability of 7, people, working in the arts in the way they want, like in the values, the type of projects we do, the small maybe compromise that we need to do are more like controlled by us, like strategic, and we want them because we know that this we can do because we want to achieve this other objective, but sometimes this is what is difficult, when you are with so many partners, is to have this strategy on long term. And I remember at one point, I decided to organize like an event with an organization in Paris who is really like doing something with migrants and many organizations, between art and refugees, but in a very communication way, a bit problematic. But I wanted to have them around the table so that we could talk with other organizations and see how we can maybe build a conversation that would go somewhere interesting. But I remember I had some critics, because then why do you invite these people? It's not interesting at all. But then on more long term, for me, it was a way to actually develop a collaboration on an interesting topic that we could bring in and to use their force as someone connected to Monet and with like visual attraction, but to be able to bring in contents, and this is so important. So I think you have to make deals, between opposites to be able to build something, and I work more like this, but I can understand that some want to work only in confrontation or parallel to it. But well, this is the journey we kind of chose, but I think there are others, of course. Huh?
Thank you. Yes, there are other questions. Do you have other questions?
Hello. First of all, thank you for your time. And I'm picking up on something you said at the beginning. So your perspective on how institutions are failing in recognizing migration as an important phenomenon. And I would add as like the cultural enrichment that migration could actually bring to a country. And in those days, we spoke a lot about citizenship and allyship. And I'm interested in actually expand, if you can expand on how your institution, what is your institution's understanding of citizenship and how you work with that concept. Okay. Thank you.
I mean, our somehow idea is that we need to give meaning to these words that today have no meaning. Democracy, citizen, nation. They are being used in so many ways that they don't mean anything somehow today, and we are trying to see how we can give back meaning to these words. So we would consider like every individual a citizen, so someone who as an identity that is plural and moving and complex, and we want this aspect to be visible within the citizenship and the projects we are trying to develop. And well, then the way to do it is not so much theory based, is more like developing, inviting artists who are interested in these issues to work within high schools, in zones in the suburbs, where we could get contact with some teachers who are engaged in this reflection. And so by doing small projects with them, then we can invite these artists to work with these young people, and together they have workshops, they have like they can travel as well, and because for instance, I don't know if there was this story of this group of young people who arrived at Musée d'Orsay 2 years ago, and it was the first time they were visiting a museum. And so they were very happy, they were joking, and they were like chatting in the museum. And at one point, some guards just told them, silence and go away because your attitude is not respectful of, So they were kind of ejected from the museum. And for me, this story is so terrible because this is a perfect example of how categories, don't meet and are totally in the absence of dialogue. And so what we are trying to do is to see how we can change the notion of the institutions for these people, so that they realize that there are different kind of institutions, maybe enclosed ones and more like moving ones, and then to make them understand that art is not just about Monet and art fairs and all this, because this is the dominant image, intellectual or conceptual, all this, but it's also about debating about issues that they are concerned with, and so we try to talk about like their opinions, and how they feel, and see how we can do like mostly conversations. There are a lot of conversations, and we don't want to push it towards artworks, because then there is this problem of instrumentalization, and if you want to do things in a good way, you need a lot of money. Eric Baudelaire did a project recently for 4 years in Saint-Denis. He got the Duchamp Prize, and he was really good to get the funding to do it properly. But this is like one case. Very often there is little. So we prefer to do this kind of work as a way to keep an eye, on what's happening, and trying to give a space for these voices within the art. And sometimes it gets bigger, sometimes it's smaller, but yeah, this is what we can do at our level. It's not enough, but yeah, it's very important.
Thank you. Other questions? Well, I have quite a bunch of on Notion that I actually collected, but you spoke about permeability and the residency as a forum. I'm wondering, especially with this residency program, if also you can tell us what you have learned with the meeting with other practices that come from other contexts and so on.
Wow, so many things. I mean, if I would like resume, like 5 years with how many artists, 4 artists a year, so well, coming from so many different contexts, what I've learned that it's like kind of very difficult to have one way to describe it. because as soon as you have one narrative, yeah, you kind of erase the other ones. It's difficult. Some artists have talked a lot about infrastructure, like existing infrastructure because many of the artists we invite come from non-Western countries where very often there is no support from the arts, not many art centers or small organizations, and so they feel happy to be in a place like Paris where there are so many institutions, and it helps you to have some distance, with your struggle as well, because you realize that really it can be worse. And so then it's a way also to valorize what you have and see how you can offer it and how it can benefit, in a good way, the resident. And there are many ways for that, so many ways. So yeah, be in a situation that you don't have so many expectations, and yeah, you listen, you feel, and from that you learn, think your program.
How long? Just a very quick question on the structure. How long do the artists stay, and yeah, what is usually the period?
Yeah, the minimum period is 3 months,
Okay.
and very often, the artist came back to do either a project after. It could be an exhibition, or it could be a collaboration with another institution, like even outside France. And so today it's a bit of a small family, and we are still in conversation with most of them. And some decided not to use their budget, so we keep it somewhere so that when they need it, we can offer it. Because sometimes, bank accounts are a difficult thing when you are, So, after 5 years, it's a lot of conversations and projects going on. But I like to see it like this, something, with living, and you don't know what will happen.
Because now the 5 years deal is over.
Yes, so this is a big point. Yes, the deal is over. So Pernod Ricard announced us that they want to stop the partnership because they have new strategies. And so we are very lucky that it stayed for so long because, today we actually need to reinvent us again and find new partners, new alliances. And we are working on it at the moment. And we have some good options, but it will mean not just one big partner, but maybe 4 partners. So 4 types of relation to deal with. And so, it's tricky, but it can be interesting because I think there are so many initiatives and private money in the arts today in Paris that it's more interesting to connect with existing ones that are proved to be interesting than to actually invent new ones. So we are trying to see where we can get some mutualization and solidarity somehow, but it's not easy because expectations from these 4 partners are different, and we need to adapt to this in terms of our way of being organized as a team. And yes, this is difficult.
I'm going to ask one last question. We've been talking these days about generosity as a currency. Most of us, I don't know the specific, but most of us are voluntaries in what we do in our spaces. So what you were talking about earlier, getting to a point where you want to be paid for what you're doing is coming closer and closer, we feel. But till now, generosity has been the currency. How do you feel about, I was wondering, in your experience, gratefulness as a currency as well, in this panorama where independent projects are also often voluntary? Is gratefulness enough, or is it important? Yeah, that's the question.
Yeah. Well, I think it's essential, yeah, to be able to be, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Generosity is like maybe the basis, of everything. And but at one point, you can lose yourself as well in being generous, like to so many, great projects and. But I think it's well, we have found a good balance, I think, with having, like this feeling that you are paid for something which is actually good to be paid, and then you can, move the lines from this with like more informal conversations that enrich yourself and you can share. There are a lot of informal moments, and it's important to have them. And but it's a very difficult question, because then you deal also with friendship, and yeah, I mean, all this can be mixed up, and it can also be a problem. So yeah, I have no real answer to all of this, but actually it's life, yeah. And everyone needs to deal with this issue somehow. And I think an institution at the end is made of people, and so it's life, yeah.
Well, thank you very much for this conversation, and I think we discussed also a very, very complicated issue. It was nice to first of all listen to also, as I said before, the problem that such an organization can have, and we are absolutely in line with what you said about the idea of claiming our institution or institutional work back, and then yes, we hope that in 20 years we still exist somehow. And thanks again for having us today. And
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure. Very nice talk. I hope we can keep in touch.
we will be in touch, definitely. Thanks.
Okay. Great.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.